This is VOA Africa.
Hello, I'm Esther Gido-Yuat. It's Wednesday, June 23rd. Welcome to Africa 54. We continue to work remotely because of the COVID-19 pandemic, but what hasn't changed is our commitment to bringing you the latest and most important news from the African continent and around the world. Here is today's Africa 54. We begin in West Africa, where the United Nations is calling Burkina Faso's 1.2 million internally displaced people the world's fastest growing humanitarian crisis, but the government is refusing to recognize thousands of IDPs who get no support. Media access has been closed to over 1 million IDPs living in official camps. Henry Wilkins follows a day in the life of one such IDP in this report from Ouagadougou.
Camboin Sin, a neighbourhood on the edge of Ouagadougou, is home to thousands of internally displaced people, IDPs, who fled the country's Islamist conflict. But an estimated 8,000 IDPs, like Haoua Bamago, receive no state support because IDPs are not allowed to register in the capital. She fled from her village, Kelbo, 6 months ago, with her 7 children and 9 grandchildren, after terrorists attacked.
It's not easy when you see armed men entering your village and killing people. There is no choice but to run away.
Bamago collects gravel to sell to builders, but barely makes enough money to keep herself and her children alive.
We are only suffering. I have never seen poverty like this. We are left with nothing, no food, and here it is not easy to live, as you can see.
Burkina Faso's Humanitarian minister has publicly stated that IDPs are not allowed to register in Ouagadougou because the city is unable to support them. But unregistered IDPs do not officially exist, so most aid groups are barred from offering help. IDP community leaders say the state is trying to force them out of the capital to live in camps in the countryside.
We are from that area and we know what it is like there. There are not enough sites created to welcome IDPs, to accommodate everyone, and the facilities are not adequate.
The government has also banned media access to official IDP camps, a move that aid groups say dangerously reduces their visibility.
Could also mean that we will see decision makers creating policies based on inaccurate or incomplete information. This will undoubtedly have negative impacts on efforts to provide and protect displaced Burkinabés.
This is what Burkina Faso's government doesn't want you to see. An IDP camp recorded by someone who, for security reasons, cannot be named. Around 400,000 IDPs here were excluded from voting in last November's election because they lost identification papers or weren't offered registration. Burkina Faso's Ministry of Women, National Solidarity, Family and Humanitarian Action did not respond to requests for comment on why it is making so many of its IDPs, like Bamago, invisible. Henry Wilkins for VOA News, Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso.
Sudan is asking the United Nations Security Council to meet and discuss a dispute over a giant dam being built by Ethiopia on the Blue Nile. Sudan's Foreign Minister Mariam Sadiq al-Mahdi is calling on the Security Council to hold a session as soon as possible to discuss the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam and its impact on the safety and security of millions of people, according to a government statement. In a letter to the council head, she called on him to urge Ethiopia to stop the unilateral filling of the dam, which exacerbates the dispute and poses a threat to the regional and international peace and security. Ethiopia is pinning its hope of economic development and power generation on the Grand Renaissance Dam, while the two downstream countries, Egypt and Sudan, are concerned about it and are seeking a binding agreement on the filling and operation of the dam. Dozens of militia fighters in the Democratic Republic of Congo have laid down their weapons and surrendered. They are the first to do so since President Felix Tshisekedi announced martial law to tackle worsening security in 2 eastern provinces. Around 140 men from various local armed groups sang and clapped as they handed themselves into authorities Monday during a ceremony in Congo's North Kivu province. Some 70 weather-beaten weapons, mostly rifles, were also turned in. Congo's mineral-rich east has been shuddered to a halt with conflict since the official end to the country's second civil war in 2003. More than 120 armed groups are now fighting for control of the region's land and natural resources. Tshisekedi declared a state of siege in early May in response to a 2-year surge in violence across the region. But deadly attacks have increased since then, according to data collected by the Kivu Security Tracker, which maps unrest in the region. The World Health Organization says it is setting up a tech transfer hub in South Africa so that companies from poor and middle-income countries can access the technology to manufacture the most advanced COVID-19 vaccines. W.H.O has the details.
The World Health Organization is setting up a hub in South Africa to share advanced vaccine know-how with companies from poor and middle-income countries.
WHO is in discussions with a consortium of companies.
The Tech Transfer Hub could make it possible for African companies to begin manufacturing mRNA vaccines in as little as 9 months, the WHO said. That is the advanced method used in shots from Pfizer and Moderna. At a WHO briefing on Monday, South African President Cyril Ramaphosa called it an historic step to spread life-saving technology.
Through this initiative and others, we will change the narrative of an Africa that is a center of disease and poor development.
But Ramaphosa continued his call for a waiver to intellectual property rules around vaccines, something that South Africa and India have been pushing for at the WTO.
It's been shown now that we just cannot continue to rely on vaccines that are made outside of Africa because they never come, they never arrive on time, and people continue to die.
The WHO said it is in talks with Pfizer and Moderna about participating in the hub. The two pharmaceutical companies have been manufacturing vaccines in wealthier countries using mRNA technology. 2 South African companies have signed up for the hub so far, the WHO said. Afrigen Biologics, described as a development company, and BioVac, described as a manufacturer.
That report by W.H.O of Reuters. When COVID-19 hit, the world was not ready. The pandemic showed us major gaps in our preparation and ability to respond to the virus. Health experts say we will have another one. VOA's Carol Pearson reports that it doesn't have to be as bad as COVID-19.
COVID-19 is leaving behind a world full of grief. Some countries may be emerging from the spread of the virus. Others are in COVID's grip. Some are going into lockdown. And many people, scientists included, are asking why the pandemic wasn't better contained. Dr. Tom Frieden has worked to end epidemics. Frieden is the former director of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
We may never know whether COVID could have been stopped, but there's something really important to understand, which is that every day around the world, public health and healthcare workers are stopping epidemics.
Another deadly coronavirus called MERS appeared in the Middle East nearly a decade ago.
I used to ask people when I was CDC director, remember that big outbreak of MERS we had in the US? And they would look a little puzzled. And they said, no. I said, that's because we didn't have one. We established the ways of testing for it. We alerted clinicians. They did find cases, and there was no spread.
Frieden now heads Resolve to Save Lives, an organization that has studied how even poor countries have beaten epidemics. The study cites examples of how countries have stopped epidemics through good leadership, investment in health facilities and health workers, and community involvement. The anthrax bacteria occurs naturally in the soil. It's deadly for animals that graze, unless they're vaccinated against it. Anthrax can also kill people who handle or eat infected meat. In Kenya, volunteers are trained to watch for signs of the disease and to report it. 2 years ago, anthrax broke out in a tribal community. A volunteer reported it, health workers took action, and more than 10,000 animals were vaccinated. An epidemic was stopped in its tracks. During the Ebola epidemic in West Africa that ended 5 years ago, Nigeria was spared because of its polio vaccination program. Health workers already had community connections, and they knew how to do contact tracing and interpret laboratory data.
Using the polio team within Lagos is really one of those success stories that we've looked at how we can amplify.
Nigeria had the Ebola outbreak under control in just 2 months, as opposed to the 2 years it took the 3 other countries. With the right infrastructure, the right leadership, and quick action, Frieden says several epidemics not only can be prevented, but have been prevented. Countries have to work together to prevent the worldwide spread of disease. One thing experts say that COVID-19 has taught us is the world is not ready for the next pandemic, and they say there will be another one. Carol Pearson, VOA News, Washington.
Samuel Dhol Ayuen fled South Sudan as a teenager. Now he is helping his host country, Uganda, to fight rising cases of COVID-19 at a hospital in Kampala. Here's David Doyle with that report.
It was the memory of his friends dying from preventable diseases that inspired South Sudanese refugee Samuel Dhol Ayuen to become a doctor. Today, he's helping save lives in Uganda's capital, Kampala, amid the global health crisis.
Most of my peers were claimed by measles. They died, and I was fortunate enough to have survived, despite the fact that there was no medical care at that time. So you were just at the mercy of the disease.
Ayuen fled civil war in South Sudan as a teenager in 2013. He and his family are among an estimated 1 million South Sudanese refugees who fled to Uganda. A total of 1.5 million refugees live in the country, making it the 4th largest refugee-hosting nation in the world, according to Wendy Kasuja, a spokesperson for the United Nations Refugee Agency. Uganda permits refugees free movement and access to public services, but Kasuja says many still face difficulties.
We have only about 20% of the refugees who are supposed to be in secondary school accessing it.
Ayuen was one of the lucky ones. After attending public high school, he won a scholarship to Makori University in Kampala.
Considering where I've come from, my parents were really excited. They even had to commute all the way to come all the way from the refugee camp, despite the challenges, to come and witness my graduation. Because that was the first degree in the family. My mother has never been to school before.
Ayuen now works at the prestigious Mulago National Referral Hospital. Being a refugee, he says, is not a punishment.
It is an opportunity to continue with your dreams outside your country.
He says he wants to specialize in neurosurgery and return to South Sudan, where he can pass on his knowledge as a lecturer.
That was David Doyle of Reuters reporting. Let us know what you think about Africa 54. Join the discussion on Facebook. Our address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our broadcast live on Facebook. Please watch and share our show with your friends. Also check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Still to come, hopes up for Africa's recovery from its worst economic recession caused by the global pandemic. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Africa 54. The U.S. will not reach President Joe Biden's goal of partially or fully vaccinating 70% of adults by July 4th, Independence Day holiday, according to the White House. U.S. officials are focusing vaccination education efforts on Americans who remain skeptical about the vaccine. U.S. congressional correspondent Catherine Gibson has more.
In the U.S., COVID-19 case numbers are down to the lowest levels since March 2020. But those encouraging numbers are coming as the White House announces it will not reach an early July goal of vaccinating 70% of all American adults. One problem, younger Americans.
The country has more work to do, is particularly with 18 to 26-year-olds. The reality is many younger Americans have felt like COVID-19 is not something that impacts them, and they've been less eager to get the shot.
The White House has announced Tuesday that 70% of Americans over age 30 have been partially or fully vaccinated. And while the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention says vaccination rates have increased in communities of color in recent weeks, U.S. lawmakers say more work needs to be done.
We will not reach the goals in many states and communities if we do not continue to address the hesitancy, misinformation, and other issues holding back Americans from getting vaccinated. We have to continue increasing access and addressing barriers which make it hard for people to get vaccines, especially for people of color.
And with nearly half of American evangelical Christians saying they will not take the vaccine, one theologian told lawmakers that hesitancy has a worldwide impact.
And at the global level, American evangelical culture is highly influential in parts of Asia and Africa. We're already exporting our misinformation and fears to the rest of the world, especially via social media.
Even with 20 to 30% of American adults unvaccinated, U.S. officials are optimistic there will not be a fourth surge of the coronavirus in the U.S. this winter.
I don't think even under those circumstances that you're going to see things like 1,000 deaths a day. I think that is a bit much. But there is a danger, a real danger, that if there is a persistence of a recalcitrance to getting vaccinated, that you could see localized surges.
And as the U.S. was working to raise its own vaccination rates, the White House said earlier this week that its goal of sharing 80 million vaccine doses globally by the end of June is being complicated by logistical challenges. Catherine Gibson, VOA News, Washington.
In northern Cameroon's councils of traditional rulers were customarily all men, but in the last 2 years have opened to women. These pioneer female deputy chiefs are battling early marriages in a region with Cameroon's highest rate of child marriage. Moki Edwin Kinzeka narrates this report by Anne Zwanko in Mokolo, Cameroon.
Fadimatou Adamou's parents 2 years ago arranged her marriage as a 16-year-old to a man more than twice her age. Her husband often beat her, says Adamou, until she was rescued by the region's first female chiefs.
I was suffering there. I didn't even have enough to eat. It was Aja Kaigama who gave money to my older sister, Aïssatou, who came to take me back here.
Cameroon's councils of traditional rulers or chiefs are customarily men. But in the last 2 years, 11 women like Aja Kaigama Saidu have been appointed as deputy chiefs. While they are still under the direction of a higher-ranking male chief, the female chiefs say the new role means they can do more to help women.
Our work with the women, we explain to them how they can go through us to express their needs at the level of the chiefdom, to denounce violence against women. They have problems that they cannot express to men. It is through us that they easily express their needs.
The UN's Children's Fund says while more than a third of Cameroonian girls are married before the age of 18 and miss out on school, the rate jumps to 60% in the country's north. Student Aïssatou Tchanigui got pregnant when she was 15 years old. Her parents wanted to pull her out of school and marry her off, but the women chiefs convinced them otherwise.
They came to talk with them to convince them that even if I have a child, my parents do not abandon me. I have the right, I have every chance in the world to succeed.
It took 4 years of lobbying by the Association of Women and Girls of the Adamou region, AFADA, to get the chiefdoms to agree to open to women. AFADA says Cameroon's female chiefs have helped hundreds of women and girls in cases of gender-based violence and accessing health care and education.
In the villages where we now have women chiefs, the feedback we have received from the schools is that the enrollment rate of young girls has increased by 40% for this school year.
AFADA says they will continue to push for more women chiefs to reduce Cameroon's gender inequalities. For Anne Zouanke in Mokolo, Cameroon, Moki Edwin Kinzeka for VOA News.
In our tech news, Africa is projected to recover in 2021 from its worst economic recession caused by the global COVID-19 pandemic, according to a report by the Africa Development Bank released earlier this year. Most economies are reopening with people on the continent getting vaccinated, and now American companies are discussing Africa as a business destination. For more insight, Africa 54's tech correspondent Paul Diho via Skype spoke with Scott Eisner, president of the U.S. Africa Business Center at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce based in Washington, D.C.
Mr. Scott Eisner, welcome to Africa 54.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Paul.
You are the president of the U.S. Africa Chamber of Commerce. Bring me up to speed. You recently had a summit. What did you guys talk about?
Thanks, Paul. It was a great summit over 2 days. The U.S. Chamber's Africa Business Center hosted, I think it was somewhere near 500 to 600 people, all with a really positive, I think, strong message that there is opportunity here on the continent for American businesses, and especially small, medium, diaspora-based businesses in the United States that are looking for a really good opportunity to export to and invest in the continent. That's why we named the summit Access with Africa, because I think there's plenty of opportunities to go around, and it's not just the story of the Chinese or the Europeans, it's really the story about American private sector, which I believe, all told, probably does more investment on the continent than anyone else, but we just don't get credit for it all the time.
What opportunities are you looking for in Africa, and in terms of engagement, what areas are you currently engaged in?
We do engage heavily in North Africa, East, West, Central, Southern Africa, so it's not just a story of U.S. private sector investment looking at Nigeria, Ghana, Kenya, South Africa. It's a story of American businesses going into many other countries, whether it's Botswana or Congo. But I think that the exciting role that we're seeing right now, especially as we all look to figure out what a post-COVID environment is in the digital space. We think there's a really interesting opportunity in the digital space. I also think, there's an untold story about Africans' creative markets and what's being produced, both music and visually on the continent. Which is why the AU, I believe, this year was deemed it the African Creative Year, because I think there's a lot of untapped potential in those spaces as well. But I mean, across the board, we're looking at diversification of markets.
When you talk to entrepreneurs on the continent, what are their concerns? What is it that they want to see, for example, U.S. businesses do in Africa?
Starts with partnership and skills and development training. There are so many really interesting mid-sized companies that exist across the continent, but access to the information, where they're located, how they're broadcasting themselves, it's not as easy of a story for Americans to unfold, I think. But I know American private sectors are very eager. When I talk to small and medium-sized enterprises, they really do see a lot of their future being on the African continent, investing in, partnering with African-led businesses.
Occasionally, I've talked to some people who run businesses, and they're afraid that to invest in Africa. They look at the risk factor and they say, oh, maybe not now, I'll wait a little bit and see how things go. You run an organization that prides itself as trying to mitigate, to help companies maybe look at it from a totally different perspective. What risks are companies here afraid of in Africa?
I think there has been liquidity challenges and Forex challenges. So how do I get my money out of the markets where I might be investing? We saw this play out in Nigeria a couple of years ago when hyperinflation settled in parallel markets of Forex. I think those are some genuine concerns wherever you are in the world. If I can't extract my money from the market where I'm investing, I've got some really large challenges. I think that the story is true. It comes back to how are we educating American businesses on the opportunities? And that's really where the Chamber prides itself. I think we've done an amazing job over the last number of years helping American companies of all sizes demystify the risk, leverage their investments with strong partnerships with African businesses.
How do you plan maybe to engage the Africa Continental Free Trade area? That's a bigger bloc that is open, trying to encourage other African countries to trade among themselves.
We see it as a really immense opportunity for American companies to find hubs on the continent to expand and invest locally around different regions, especially as the non-tariff barriers start to get mitigated, the tariff schedules come into play, and the different chapters of the AFCFTA get worked out. And now everything can be good on paper. It's how do you implement will be the real question over the next number of years. And we're partnering very strongly with Wamkele Mene, the Secretary General of the AFCFTA. We're working with our ambassadorial network across the continent to help educate American businesses. We are all in on the AFCFTA. We see it as an amazing opportunity to come to the continent, an African design trade agreement for Africa. And I think it's going to be a hallmark for what the future looks like on the continent.
Well, thank you so much for your time.
Great. Thanks, Paul. Appreciate it.
That was Africa 54 tech correspondent Paul Ndiho speaking to Scott Eisner, president of the U.S. Africa Business Center at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us in Washington, thanks for watching.
Be sure to join me on the next Straight Talk Africa. We'll take you to the movies as internet streaming giants battle for top billing and online audiences across Africa. We ask who's winning and who's watching. We'll also look at the growing demand for homemade stories by Africans, for Africans, and about Africans. We'll have it all right here on the next Straight Talk Africa.